Hello, my friend, and welcome back to the Live Label Free podcast. I feel like I say this every time, but I am so excited for today's episode. I'm speaking to Stefanie Michele, who is a binge eating and body image coach. Stefanie struggled with a variety of eating disorders for decades and tried a variety of recovery approaches only to keep feeling like there was something missing. Similar to how discovering you're autistic can suddenly cause your entire life to make sense, Stefanie's integration of the nervous system and somatic experience was the puzzle piece that caused everything to click into place for her. As I quote in my book, Rainbow Girl, she too was able to turn her mess into her message. And today, you'll be learning just how powerful that message is. Nervous system regulation has been a massive part of my own healing journey, as well as those of my clients, so I just know you're going to get so much value from my conversation with Stefanie. Now, without further ado, let's get to it.
Gotta put one foot in front of the other, and you'll be around the corner soon.
Welcome to Live Label Free, the podcast, where you'll learn to let go of limiting labels and embrace your unique brain. As my mom says so beautifully in her song,
Fear is a heavy load to carry.
which is why on this podcast, you'll learn the scientific links between neurodiversity and eating disorders, giving you a deeper understanding of how you can face your fears and become truly free. Together, you and me, we will keep putting
One foot in front of the other.
Welcome, Steph. Thank you so much for coming onto the Live Label Free podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. As I was saying, it's the first day of a new school year here for my kids. So I feel like a little back to school jitters, but it's an exciting day. I'm feeling good. The sun is out.
The sun always helps. For anyone who doesn't know you or doesn't know your podcast that you co-host with Sarah, who are you? What do you do? What's your story?
I'm Stefanie Michele, and I'm a binge recovery and body image coach, which is slowly expanding into other realms. I'm also now in training to become a somatic therapist. So that's really a strong focus of the way that I look at binge eating and body image right now. But I'm also a certified occupational therapist, a certified intuitive eating counselor, and a certified health coach. So I came to this work after struggling with it myself, obviously for over 2 decades of having my own eating disorder and all types of eating disorders within that. And when I recovered, I just felt like this was what I wanted to actually do. I wanted to help other people do this. And COVID just happened to align with that goal in that I stopped working because I couldn't go into, my OT facility anymore. And I started an Instagram account and I started posting about my recovery and the thoughts I was having about binge eating and all of the intersections of these things that I've mentioned with the nervous system and food and things and started coaching full time.
That's so, I am the biggest advocate for people turning their mess into their message. And I believe that, lived experience is the most valuable kind of training that there is. I feel like there's so many professionals out there that come across as like, I know what this problem is, like I know how to help you, and if you can't be helped, then no one can help you. And I just remember being in treatment for my eating disorder many years ago, and just my therapist saying, I really understand. And I just got so mad, and I was like, do you have an eating disorder yourself? And she was like, no. And I was like, well, then you do not understand.
I know.
And I think, that you just bring such immense value to your clients and the community in that when you say you understand, obviously everyone's story is very different, but you've been where they are, and that's so valuable. So I'm curious, because you said, you've been through all these different kinds of eating disorders. You're a body image coach. You deal with binge eating. You're also a certified occupational therapist, and kind of a little bit of everything, I feel like. What inspired you specifically to specialize in binge eating and body image?
That's a good question. That was always the eating disorder that I identified with the most. So I did experience some years of anorexia, which then turned into binge eating, which turned into bulimia, went back to binge eating, went back to bulimia and orthorexia. Binge eating just seemed to be the most central part of the story, with the exception of in the beginning with anorexia. But after that, it was such a struggle with the binge eating. And that's just where I felt the most misunderstood. And it's where I felt that the angle of treatment that I was receiving and the therapies that I was receiving just weren't hitting the mark. So I feel a really strong passion for communicating what binge eating really is and how to work with it in a way that I never saw represented in my entire therapeutic models that I went through. And I did, I was in IOPs and I was in therapy and I did this and I did that. And I just never felt like what the heart of it was really got addressed. So I like to speak on behalf of that. And body image was, of course, the undercurrent through all of it. And I struggled with that to the degree that I'm shocked that I am here to tell the tale, to be honest. My body and I were mortal enemies, and learning more about body image and what that really was doing for me and what was really going on underneath that, and all the complexities of like the reality of body image in a culture that we live in that isn't, so we've got the inner depths of it and the personal value system of it, but also the cultural one. And there's no body image therapy. Like there's not a body image, area of expertise. It's really untapped. So when I started making making headway with my body image, and the fact that I can be neutral about my body to any degree is such a testament to me, this is so miraculous that I felt like this is an area where we need more voices, because there's just simply not enough resources. There aren't enough resources for people who are trying to do that work. And I just feel the most passionately about them. So this is not to say that I don't feel passionately about orthorexia and anorexia or bulimia. I absolutely do. But binge eating and body image just seems to be my stronger pulls, I guess. Yeah.
No, I really, really resonate with that in so many ways, because kind of in your introduction, you sharing you have all these, I have this. I think as, people that eventually become entrepreneurs, we are often very multi-passionate. It's not like we only want to do one thing. And for me, kind of my story started similarly with just the eating disorder and kind of documenting my recovery around that. But then when I discovered I'm autistic, it was like this piece of the puzzle was like that had been floating around and missing this whole time, was like, wow, now this all makes so much sense. And that's kind of what pulled me in the direction of bridging the gap between autism and eating disorders. And I think when you find that passion, I guess, or kind of clicks into place, it's like that gut feeling of this feels right, which I kind of do believe has to do with the nervous system, and just like all of that kind of experiencing. And again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for bringing the topic, kind of I almost see you as like bridging the gap between binge eating and the nervous system and all these aspects that are really not being talked about, because a lot of it is, like emotional eating, like you can't deal with your mental state, but it's like the body is such a holistic, all-encompassing vessel almost, that to say that any one problem is purely mental or purely physical, it's like, how have we like regressed back to like the Middle Ages sometimes? I'm just like, it doesn't make any sense. So, kind of with all that said, when did you start integrating, somatic experiencing and nervous system regulation into your work? Because as we were just talking, like it changed both of our lives. So I'm really curious.
So interestingly, I did not even know about somatic experiencing until I was recovered, or to the degree that we are recovered. Which somatic experiencing, for anyone who doesn't isn't aware of it, it's looking at the stored, it deals a lot with trauma, but the stored emotions and the way that energy lives in the body, in the nervous system itself. So it's not just an emotional lens. It's not looking at like, that are we really sad underneath and we just have to get to our sadness, it's more like, to me, it's a bit more scientific even than that, which is kind of how I got into it, because I didn't like to think about anything outside of cognition. Like I was very much, I still like to intellectualize everything. I'm much more comfortable thinking about things, and feeling and emotions was just not an area that I felt comfortable with. And I tended to roll my eyes out actually a lot. But when I started pairing the things I had learned as an occupational therapist and the nervous system with what I felt like I was actually experiencing, in reflection, like as I was recovering, I think it felt safer for me to look at that. Yeah. I started to make those connections, and it just, like, to your point, you just are like, that makes sense. Like this feels so true that I know it.
Yeah. You feel it. Yeah.
You really, it's like it's like a puzzle piece clicking with another one. You're like, oh yes, of course. And that was when I started looking at the role of the nervous system and thinking about my experiences through that lens, to the point where now I'm actually getting certified to become, because I've experienced the power of doing this work and being a client myself, in somatic work and working with the dysregulation of the nervous system, which still existed for me after the eating disorder left. So that was the interesting piece, is that I was symptom free from my eating disorder, but still struggled a lot with massive anxiety. Right. And depression and anxiety had also been players in my entire experience with my eating disorder. But I realized that the eating disorder recovery didn't fix those things, whereas I always thought they would. Right. So I started to look more at anxiety itself individually. And that's when I started doing my own somatic work, and felt the benefits of that and felt the effect of that, and continue to. So started interpreting it through that lens.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I love that you kind of brought up, even when I was recovered from the eating disorder, there was still this underlying untouched, no pun intended, issues almost, even though I don't like to call it issues, because I think it's just the body's response. I also believe, when we talk about trauma, I always joke with my clients how, in my own eating disorder treatment, it was always in therapy, like, what's the deep, dark hole that caused your eating disorder kind of thing. And I have a sentence in my book that literally says, if I knew, I wouldn't be here, you dumbo. And we often joke about how, the therapy itself, when you're being invalidated and gaslit, is the most traumatic thing of all. But another thing that I do believe is that restriction, anorexia, orthorexia, mental restriction, like you and Sarah talk about a lot on your podcast, is also trauma to the body and trauma to the nervous system. And that's why there was this one post you did, I forget the name you called or the term you came up with, that when you feel really anxious or when you feel very nervous, you may want to turn to food because your body associates like anxiety or nervousness with restriction. What was that
regulating? Regulating?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And the meta binge, you have all these, you should have I am Stefanie Michele dictionary. That would be really cool. I would totally promote that. But yeah, and then also that you kind of mentioned, like, even though I was recovered from the eating disorder, there was still that underlying anxiety. Because ultimately, like, the eating disorder is a manifestation of, it's a symptom in and of itself, I truly believe. And you really do have to do that deeper work, that trust work, because kind of backtracking, one of my favorite quotes is, the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust. And I think in that sense, the eating disorder is almost like a distrust with your body. And that's where the body image issues come in too. And that's why, looking at that root, that anxiety, like, I feel like that's almost the puzzle piece that will help gather all the other puzzle pieces, if that makes sense.
It does. And this is so my word is safety. Like, that to me was the theme that kept coming up again and again and again and again through all of this. It was like safety through the eating disorder recovery. And then even as that was feeling better and getting better. And I felt so liberated by that. And that did alleviate a lot of stress in my life and a lot of anxiety in my life. But there was still this sense of, it was just a lack of feeling completely safe.
Right.
And I recognized that it's like, that's the thing. There's something about feeling safe in my own body that this eating disorder has been covering up. And I'm now seeing and I'm working with, but there's more under here. Like there's something about that now the anxiety is filling in for. So to me, I feel, and I don't know if everyone would feel this way, but I feel like the bottom line, the foundation is safety. And that's a nervous system job, right? Like
absolutely
feeling safe in our bodies. Whether that's physical safety from the trauma of having an eating disorder, right? Like, and the ways that our body has gotten terrified that we won't have enough and that we won't survive and what that feels like and that we'll be restricted, cognitively and mentally, the way our lives get smaller and the lack of, safety in that area, the lack of safety emotionally, the lack of safety with boundaries, the lack of safety with ourselves and even feeling at home in ourselves. I mean, there's so many layers of safety to talk about truly. And I do every day I talk about it. There's endless material for this. But to me, this is what it comes back to. So nervous system work is that to me. It's that sense of literally feeling like you can breathe out, like you can release breath because it's not dangerous. And that is that out breath is kind of what I refer to a lot as the feeling like I'll come back to again and again. Even just now as I'm talking, I can hear my voice got slower. And, I sat back in my chair, even as I'm, because I'm tapping I'm giving my hand to heart kind of thing. And it is a different sense of calm in the body, calm, trust, ease, joy sometimes. Sometimes it's fun and connection too, but it's safe. It's a feeling of being safe. And I think that there's a lot of ways we get pulled away from that in our lives, and in our culture and in the way we run as humans today.
Do you feel trapped in the mental hunger games? Perhaps you think about food so much of the time that you can barely concentrate on anything without being interrupted by food thoughts. Or maybe you're well aware that you're restricting and you know that you're actually really hungry, but you feel that if you actually honored your mental hunger, you'd swing to the other side and you won't ever be able to stop eating. Or maybe you resonate with this. You're really far along in your recovery and you've gained weight and maybe you're even weight restored, yet still you can't stop thinking about food. If this sounds like you, my friend, you need to watch my online training, How to Win the Mental Hunger Games. I created this training because I know how confusing it is to be surrounded by all this contradictory recovery advice. Some people are saying food freedom, intuitive eating, you have to honor all your cravings to recover, while others are saying that you need to eat mindfully and you need to relearn what hunger and fullness is so that you can come to realize that your cravings for junk food are just trying to fill an emotional void. I mean, no wonder you're confused. I was too. But thankfully, I found my way to food freedom, and my training is here to help you do the same. It teaches you exactly why you're experiencing mental hunger, regardless of your weight or size. It also explains how to know if it's really hunger and not emotional eating or binge eating. And lastly, you'll learn the number one mistake most people make that actually keeps them stuck in mental hunger. The best part of it all is that this training is 100% free. It's free 99, baby. I just love that one. All you have to do is head over to livelabelfree.com/mental hunger to watch the free training, How to Win the Mental Hunger Games. Now, let's get back to today's episode. I often describe being autistic as feeling like I'm constantly in fight or flight mode, and I feel like being, an anxiously wired person, being perfectionistic, type A, as I feel most people who develop disordered eating are, we are constantly in this state of like, okay, what's the next thing? We're constantly feeling this rush. And I feel like that's that state of the nervous system of I'm not safe. I can't be grounded. There's not enough time kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, I'm working on. And again, one of your posts recently was a reel of someone sleeping on a couch, and it was like sometimes doing the work is just not doing anything. It's like not doing the work kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's something I mean, I realizing too, I'm talking so fast because I'm like I'm so enthusiastic, but
Yeah.
at the same time I'm like, okay, I need to breathe. Um uh,
I am exactly the same way.
yeah.
So
No, I love that. And I'm just loving this conversation so much. But yeah, when it comes to, safety, like I believe the core word, like you said, and nervous system work, and, it can be really difficult because we've almost become addicted to being in fight or flight mode.
yes.
So for anyone listening to this who is dealing with any kind of eating disorder, whether that be, yeah, anything, because I don't even like to label them necessarily. I actually recently thought of how autism is considered a spectrum. I feel like we should also just have like the eating disorder spectrum. I
Hmm.
feel like that would be so much more applicable. But anyways, I digress. What kind of tips or tip do you have to help people feel grounded, and like where would
Yeah.
someone start in, creating this safety for themselves?
So I have so many answers to this question, because one of the things that comes up, even as we were talking about this, is that if you told me, especially from a chronic fight or flight state, which I lived in, and I would say up until relatively recently,
Hmm.
and I still live in it quite a
Yeah.
bit of time. I don't know that I don't know that I would trust the idea of slowing down
Hmm.
inherently, right? Like that's
Right.
the whole problem, is that the reason you're running this quickly is because there is some kind of baseline. It's not a belief. It's a
No,
feeling that
exactly.
you can't slow down, because if you do, danger, danger.
Right.
This is not logical. This is not intellectual. No,
Right.
no lion is really coming to bite us, to eat us out of our cave if we
Yeah.
rest, but we feel this way. This is how it feels. And I have clients who'll say to me, sometimes we talk about this, feelings about things, and they're like, Stefanie, I feel like if I do this, I'm going to die. So like, I know I'm not going
Yeah.
to die, but I feel like I'm going to die.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how the nervous system runs. It's very
Right.
black and white,
Right.
very survival. And so one of the first things I want to say is that I don't think that healing the nervous system or, regulating yourself has to be such a leap.
Hmm.
I do run high energy, and I have some fight or flight. And in some ways, I have really thrived on that. Like it's helped
Yeah.
me, and it's kind of almost part of who I am at times. And so I don't feel like I have to become some kind of Zen monk on a mountaintop
Right.
in order to be healed.
Right.
And if you told me I did, I might say, I don't really want that. I'm not sure that's what I'm going for.
Yeah.
So maybe thinking about regulation as a little bit more meeting you where you are, and finding groundedness in like just some casual moments, rather than thinking that you have to somehow become a grounded person. Like that has to be a job that you are perfectionistic about taking on that role now. It started for me with really small incremental doses of things that when I started working with a somatic therapist, one of the things she said that I tell my clients is, if you can only tolerate like an internal quiet or groundedness or calm or slowness for 1 second, which some people can barely tolerate that long,
Yeah.
then that is great. That is a great place to begin. And that's where you start. And I assume when she said that, I was like, okay, great. Pressure's off. I don't have to sit here, because if you tell me I have to do 10 minutes of silence a day or 10 minutes of grounding a day, I'm not going to do it. Maybe I will. My perfectionistic type A student will do it, and then I will stop doing it.
Yeah.
But the fact that the permission in just saying all I need to do is find a second of being able to recognize I was speaking more slowly to you, and sit back in my chair and just take that in for a second or two.
Yeah.
And then re-engage, in what is actually where the work began for me, and is enough. I talk about sometimes, when winter was kind of fading out and spring was coming in, I was driving my car. This is just last spring. And I was, driving out my street, and the sun kind of came through the window of my car, window, hit my arm. And that it was the first beam of, sunlight that felt warm.
Right.
And I was like, like spring is coming. And I was because I love when the weather changes to warm.
Me too. Yeah.
And that moment right there of just like noticing that.
Yeah.
was not, it wasn't grand. And I was probably stressed out wherever I was going, but it was this moment of ease. It was just this moment of sunlight on my arm. And it was just noticing that I was just exaggerating it for a few extra seconds. And that's it. Just those sorts of things, just stretching something out a couple of extra seconds and paying attention to it is all you have to do. And the reason paying attention to it matters is because our brains will otherwise be like irrelevant information, irrelevant information, irrelevant information. We are paying attention to what is wrong. And that's the bias. But teaching it, it's okay to pay attention to what is okay and what is not wrong is worthwhile. And that, let's start looking at that more. That's it. That was enough for me to start peppering into my days over time to change things. It actually did accumulate into change, just this, nothing more. So I always, to start really small and to think in smaller terms around this stuff is, to me, more realistic. And it's slower though. I think it's not like a quick turnaround. We don't see these big changes happening really quickly, but that is how somatic therapy works. That's how regulation works. It's slow and steady, which,
I feel like that's how living a purposeful life works, right? Because I'm actually writing a book now about slow living and how that can actually help autistic people, because we are constantly in this state of fight or flight mode. And I have a sentence in that book that's like, if you're practically rushing to your deathbed, what's the point of living? It's very blunt, but how you live each day is how you live your life. So it's like, if every day you're like, I need to do this as fast as possible, there's no time, well then you're never going to have time ever in your entire life. And what you mentioned about start small, and start focusing on the things that you enjoy that are positive reminds me of another one of my favorite quotes, and that is, where your attention goes, energy flows, which I'm sure you've heard of before. And you mentioned, that change happens small incremental steps. Like that is change, because the brain learns through observing our actions. And that's kind of going back to what you said, like cognitively, it doesn't matter that there's no threat. If you've been conditioning yourself to live in this way, your brain is just, going on primal mode and being like, this is how we've always done it. We're going to keep doing that. I'm communicating with you, my nervous system, and we're just going to keep rushing. But yeah, like you're totally right. To feel safe, you need to give your brain and your body evidence that there is safety. And I think you do that by saying, I can take a few seconds right now to focus on what is positive. And I have noticed that massively in myself, that whenever I have these really anxious, racing thoughts, I reframe it now to, what's one good thing that happened? Or, whatever. Because the more we focus on those negative thoughts or feelings, the more negative and stronger those feelings get. And yeah, also giving yourself permission to feel the hard things, without resisting them also, because I'm going to keep throwing quotes at you. It's like that old, I don't even know if it's Confucius or Buddha or one of those big people, that is, resist, pain is inevitable, but like the suffering is optional.
Yes.
The more you resist the pain, like the more it becomes suffering. So yeah, thank you, for sharing that, especially because a majority of my audience is autistic, and, caregivers and parents of autistic people, we need that slow, controlled approach. And that's why this whole raging, all in recovery thing that's been floating around the internet for years, like every autistic person I've spoken to is like, that is so overwhelming to me. The fact that I just need to change my entire life, let go of the thing that's been providing me safety for however long, and just be like, oh, fuck that. I'm just going to do this whole eating thing, resting. It's not really realistic, I feel like, for many people, because that's just not how quickly the brain, nor the nervous system, nor any part of the body can change. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
That's an excellent point. And I agree. And it's so interesting because when I first recovered, and I put that in air quotes just because it's such a strange term, I did an all-in approach. And I realize now that I'm like, that I don't know how that even worked for me because of what you just said.
Right.
But I think there was some kind of slow lead up to getting to that place. But to have worked with so many clients since then, and to realize that everyone works differently, and now to see the nervous system, and what you just said makes so much sense, where it's like your brain can't just flip a switch and let go of this stuff. But what comes through, and when you were speaking, I was like, it's this level of, and I hesitate to use the word because some people, I feel like sometimes it's so overused, but the word compassion, right? Like, it's such
I love that word. No, I love it.
As long as you love it, all right, we can go with it. But it's, it's something that I think is used a lot, to the point where it's like, what does it mean anymore?
Right.
But there's something about saying to yourself, I make sense. Like, if I can't do all in, and the influencer on, Instagram or YouTube is saying that that's how she recovered, but that's not working for you, and that's too overwhelming. Like, that makes sense. And I think that to be able to apply some of the nervous system, the lens of that on this, again, the science of that just is so compelling. It's like, that's very logical. That makes a lot of sense as to why you can't just jump into something. Your body just simply does not feel safe and doesn't have the evidence that it is safe. And this is what we need. And that, when you think about that, you're like, well, then there's nothing wrong with me. That's just the way the body works. Like, this is just the way that our physiology is. And that can take a lot of pressure off, so that we stop being perfectionists about what we need to do to recover, and the right way to do that, and the right way to be thinking, and the right way to be regulating and grounding. And, like, that there's all this pressure built up, so that we're not able to actually listen to ourselves around, like, what do I need? How do I integrate all this information I'm getting and apply it to myself in a way that actually realistically makes sense for me, without thinking I'm failing? You know what I mean? And I think that's a lot of what I see now and work with people on, for people who will come to me and say, I've been working on this for a really long time, based on a lot of social media posts and things, that I've been absorbing, which is wonderful. I mean, there's so much education we can get out there, but there is usually this undercurrent of, I'm doing it wrong, or I'm supposed to be doing it that way. And I keep running in circles. And it's usually what happens is, it's coming to what do you need? What does your system need? And that's the part that I think we really need to, like, that's an art to listen to, and to really understand, and to have compassion for. That to me is the way that I'm approaching, and the way that I think about most things now, including things for myself, around, like, how does this make sense in my context? Not what Susie's doing, but like what I'm doing and what I need. How does that make sense for me?
No, I mean, again, so much to unpack here. First of all, love that you're using the term "make sense," because that was pretty much the key term throughout my entire eating disorder, especially as an autistic person. Was I believe that my eating disorder was a manifestation of underlying undiagnosed autism. And for me, food and exercise needed to make sense. And that just became my eating disorder. And no one understood that. I was like, no, you don't get it. Like, I can't eat something else right now, otherwise it doesn't make sense, kind of thing. And I think, when I discovered I'm autistic, it allowed me to stop asking what's wrong with me, and it allowed me to start asking, what do I need? Which was exactly what you just alluded to. And I really like that you kind of piggybacked off the all in, and you kind of came up with the term compassion, because interestingly enough, I think the label all in, the moment you say to yourself, I'm going all in, is actually the very moment you're giving yourself compassion, the very moment you're giving yourself permission for it to be messy, for it to not to be perfect. So I think inherently the label all in is meaningless, just like any other word, right? I'm sure you've read Eckhart Tolle's book, like A New Earth, and he talks about, how can we deduce any complex being to a mere name, or a mere, gender, or whatever, these kind of things. And that's kind of how I see all in too, is you see these people on Instagram saying, oh, the gym is saved my life. Going all in saved my life. But it's like, that external thing outside of you did not save your life. You putting in the work saved your life. And I think we hide behind labels because we need something tangible. We need to say, that's what it was.
I know.
But I think, like you said with the word compassion and giving yourself permission for it to be messy, I think that is why all in works for so many people, is because that's the moment they say, I'm allowed to do this my way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true. And this is the double-edged sword of what, social media in some ways, because I think some of these concepts are becoming labels.
Yeah.
And for example, I recovered before I was really heavily invested in social media. So a lot of this, I never called it all in. That's not a term that I knew, but that's what it was by virtue of what you're saying. Like I came to this place of saying, I'm ready to be messy. I'm ready. I understand. And this was something I came to rather than having had it told to me and taught to me, because I wonder if that would have felt different if I felt like I was doing this thing that the outside was telling me to do.
Yeah.
Even, last week on my podcast, we talked about anti-diet as a label and as an identity.
Yeah.
And a lot of these concepts that can be so helpful can get a little bit, if not corrupted, they can become a little bit taken outside of ourselves when they become labels of things, and then they become expectations, and they become rules, and then there's this right and wrong way. And I think it's like we have to keep coming up with new terminology to describe what it is that we mean, and what is actually is happening. But I think it is still this touching base back with self, and that, whatever's going on out here, how much are we attaching to the label of that thing versus the ideas and the embodied sense of that thing, and to just keep coming back to that, what it means for you.
Like, who are you at your core? And yeah, that's kind of why I named my whole brand Live Label Free. Because it was like throughout the whole entire, my youth, oh, she's such a perfectionist. She's so this, she's so that. Oh, she has very anxious nature. And then it was like, oh, now you have anorexia. Now you have depression. Oh, now you also have OCD. Oh, what's this? You're too complex. You can't be helped. You're just going to have to, I was like, I can't do this. That was for me. Like, I cannot be all these labels anymore, because it's coming back to that feeling. I was like, this is not me. Like, I am me, and I will always be me. And I think almost that inner, like, totally not logical, totally not cognitive awareness, that was my nervous system. I call it the autistic inner fire. That was like, you're allowed to just be you without any labels. And I know that, autism and everything we've been talking about, labeling something as binge eating or binge or regular eating or all these terms, like, I believe that there are two types of labels. Like, there are labels that restrict us and limit us, like all these diet terms, anti-diet, intuitive eating. Like, when you use them in certain restrictive ways, they will restrict you. But when you see them for what they are, merely a label, merely a way that us humans can communicate with each other, and you don't tie your identity to them, that's when they become functional. I mean, we wouldn't have met if you weren't using certain words right on Instagram.
Right.
And in that sense, like, they help us function better. But I think it's so important, that we're able to distinguish when we do feel these external pressures to behave or be a certain way. And I loved the half an English muffin serving size thing you posted on your story yesterday. That's another label that we can just observe it for what it is and be like, that's interesting. And I am going to have 2 servings of this, whatever that means, because that's what my body needs. Not because I'm weird, not because I'm bad, but that's what my unique body needs. Have you read my book, Rainbow Girl, yet? If not, you're definitely going to want to grab your very own copy by visiting the link livelabelfree.com/Rainbow Girl. But you may be wondering, what is my book even about? Well, let me tell ya. Rainbow Girl, My Journey to Living Life in Full Color is a memoir of my entire journey. I share what it was like growing up undiagnosed autistic, how this led to the development of an eating disorder, and all the steps I took to fully recover and become label-free. The feedback on Rainbow Girl has been so incredible already. All the messages, emails, and reviews truly warm my heart and illustrate how we need more stories of lived experience in the autism and eating disorder recovery space. Just listen to what Lou, who you may know as neurodivergent_Lou on Instagram, has to say about the book. Rainbow Girl is an incredibly gripping read that exceptionally captures the autistic experience of eating disorders, which is so rarely discussed. While reading, it felt like I was simultaneously walking with Livia through her darkest and most vulnerable times, but also that through her experiences, she was guiding me, sharing the light, perseverance, hope, and joy. So much of Rainbow Girl resonates with my own story and experiences as a neurodivergent individual. Livia's book highlights an empowering and authentic message that I will forever carry with me. If you want to learn how to free yourself or an autistic loved one from an eating disorder, grab your copy of Rainbow Girl today by visiting the link livelabelfree.com/Rainbow Girl. So again, that's livelabelfree.com/Rainbow Girl. Now, let's get back to today's episode. Speaking of messy and all the things, something that autistic people really struggle with, which often leads to binge eating, is just executive functioning difficulties, like making a meal, plating a meal, doing groceries, planning what you're going to make, actually making it, cleaning up, kind of all the aspects that go into eating can be really, really overwhelming. So how do you feel that specifically impacts, I guess, how do you feel like the nervous system is related to that? And what would be like a tip, again, like a very low-hanging fruit that you could give our audience?
It's a great question. The way that I think it's interesting because you're speaking about the overwhelm of plating food and putting food in. And I wish I could remember the exact example because yesterday it was something like the most trivial, quote unquote, task, the most like an easy thing to do. I said to my husband, who is very supportive of all of these things and all of my idiosyncrasies. I said, I forget what it was, but it was kind of like, if this one barrier is in the way, this isn't going to get done. Even though he's like, well, can't you just do that, remove the barrier, so to speak, and do the thing? I'm like, no, I can't. It's too overwhelming then. It's like, it has to be a direct route. So overwhelm, I relate to a lot as an anxious person, not to use a label, but to communicate what I mean.
Yes.
And what I was finding was that in that fight or flight state that I was mostly living in and still sometimes live in to a degree, I don't have as much access to executive functioning. A simple task is incredibly overwhelming when I'm fast and a little bit vigilant. And when you're, in that state, you have more primal brain going on.
Yep.
So I have compassion for this now. And it's kind of like when primal brain is on to some degree, I am going to find easy things hard. And I'm not going to be able to do what other people do as easily. And so I need to know this about myself. Whatever the root cause, whether it's ADHD or autism or anxiety or, whatever, that there is this barrier to executive functioning.
Yeah.
That's not because you're not intelligent or because you're, it's because of the nervous system and the access we have to using it, because the executive functioning part of the brain is the most developed part of our nervous system. There's 3 parts. And so in order for us to use executive functioning, the other parts have to be a little quieter. And so to me, it's like, okay, how do I quiet my thought, the primal part of my brain a little more so that I can move into my executive functioning and perform a task? Sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is like recognizing that sometimes you can't, and that's okay. I mean, it's frustrating, but it's not your fault. Like, it's not a character issue. It's more of a nervous system dysregulation.
Yeah.
So as far as like a low hanging fruit and how, like, the first ways that I might start thinking about that, honestly, I don't know how corny this sounds, I guess, but so, how when I was talking to you and my voice slowed down and I close my eyes, and I'm doing it now, and I can see that. So I'll rule a sense out. I rule out my vision most often. Sometimes I do have noise canceling earphones too that I'll sometimes use to rule out the auditory sense, but usually it's my eyes, and I'll close my eyes and I will slow down the thoughts and the voice and the breath and my pace, because I'll also a lot of times be pacing a lot, and I will just notice the speed of everything.
Yeah.
And I close my eyes because it makes it easier for some reason to slow, and I will give myself like skin to skin contact, usually here on my chest, for just a couple of seconds, and that is all. This is it. That is all I take. And if it doesn't work, it means I just can't access that. And for me, I just kind of like, okay, that's where I am right now. But sometimes I can, and I can slow that down just a little bit. And when I can get just a little bit slower, I can feel more I feel the executive functioning sort of coming up. There's a little bit more access, where then I can say, okay, what is my next step? Okay. And then I might move right into speed, and then it might get overwhelming again. But I think the practice of just this, literally 1, 2, 3, is sometimes enough to get me to the next step, or to figure out like, how do I cut down on the steps needed to just get the job done?
Yeah.
And in that there is empowerment, because even if you do that once or twice, you realize you can do that and that you have some influence on that.
Yeah. It's evidence that you're capable of accessing that. Yeah. And even you just doing that and closing your eyes, like, I felt the calm too. And we're like thousands of miles away.
Isn't that cool?
Just, very cool. Because where on the East Coast are you?
I'm in New Jersey.
New Jersey. Okay, yeah, because I grew up in Boston. So I'm actually moving back next year. So very excited. And if you and Sarah ever do another US event, I'm totally attending, because I wanted to come to your Ireland one. Except that's literally my mom's birthday, so I'm like, done.
We will do others. We will have more US locations.
But yeah, I mean, I love that, how you just said, what do I need right now? Just to slow down, to access that again, and also again giving yourself compassion. If it doesn't work, that's okay. Moving on, but then you try again. And when it does work eventually, and it'll start working more often, I've definitely noticed that within myself, you gain more confident in your capabilities. And that goes in all aspects of life, right? I mean, I always give the very simple example of a little child learning how to read. They don't suddenly know how to read. They practice, and then they make a mistake, and then they're corrected. And sometimes they don't get the word or the pronunciation right, but they try again, and the more and more they try again, the easier it becomes. And who knows, one day they'll be a writer themselves. It's fun. I mentioned that because when I was in first grade, I had to go to this like special reading and writing class because I apparently didn't know how to read or write, even though now looking back with the autistic lens, I think I just didn't want to engage because I didn't feel safe. Because now people are like, wow, you're such a good writer. And I'm like, when I was 10, I was apparently an illiterate little child. Because I feel safe now. And I mean, even with writing my first book was so anxiety provoking for me. But now, after writing, making it my daily practice, similar to, nervous system regulation and, incorporating these techniques into your life, you become more confident as a person. And now I'm writing my fourth book, and it's like, not even, of course, there's still that fear of failure, because, I mean, you can only succeed if you are willing to face the possibility of failure. But at the same time, I've really learned and given my brain evidence, like, this does become easier. So I think that's a really great place to wrap up, is it will get better. It will become easier. Do you have any last words of wisdom for our listeners?
I don't know if this makes people feel worse or better, but I don't know that it gets talked about enough when we're talking about success or things working, that can actually be years in the making, not weeks or months. And especially with this idea of slowing down and regulation of the nervous system, that is not a 4-week fix or even like that's something that you can dedicate years to, and that's again, I don't know if it makes you feel better or worse. For me, it makes me feel better. I feel like
makes me feel better too. Makes me feel better too.
It's like, I'm just fine. I'm not behind. But that to sort of approach it from the viewpoint of, this will take me some years to work through, and that you'll feel progress within those years. And there's moments of feeling like, wow, this is working for me, but that you're not expected to get this in a month. You know what I mean? That it's something much you can take your time with. I think it's actually better suited for change, actually. So I always like to mention that, and to the point where I'm like, I need to make a course on this stuff, but it would have to be 2 years long. And I don't know that I'm going to get anybody to sign up for that.
Well, like you've got one client, Stephanie. You've got one. No, I mean, I so relate to that. Like every day I have these ideas like, oh, I need to do a course about that and write a book about this. But it's like, but there's not enough time. And then you have to like focus on what's most important. But I mean, it really does make me feel better, if that's any solace, in that it does take years. And I mean, in my author bio in my book, it says, Livia is a lifelong learner. That's how I identify myself as, because like I learned about this whole nervous system somatic regulation stuff like 2 years ago, and I still find myself in fight or flight mode every single day. And I'm like, okay, Livia, you're allowed to calm down, and it doesn't always work. And sometimes I do, turn to what people would label as unhealthy behaviors. But I think that this isn't about it's not about getting it perfect. It's not always about being calm, because nervous system regulation is about being able to flexibly shift between the states.
Exactly. That's such an important point.
Yeah. It's not about always being in perfect executive functioning state. Like that would be something physiologically very wrong with you.
Yes, that's not the goal. Exactly. It's about the flexibility of being able to move between and navigate that more efficiently and like more peacefully for yourself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, Steph, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you, learn more about you, work with you? Because again, you are such a valuable being in this world, and I'm so grateful to know you.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. I have a website. I am StefanieMichele.com, and I'm on Instagram all the time. That's my primary social media resource. I am Stefanie Michele, and I also have a podcast, Life After Diets, that I co-host with Sarah.
Yeah, highly recommend that podcast, everyone. And I will leave all the links in the show notes below as well. So yeah, thanks again so much, Steph, for coming on the podcast. And everyone listening, I will chat with you in the next episode. Bye-bye for now.
Just one foot in front of the other, and you'll see around the corner soon.
This podcast has been recorded by your host, Liv. This podcast has been edited by my small but mighty Live Label Free team, and the beautiful song One Foot in Front of the Other that you are now listening to was written and recorded by my beautiful mom, Louise Alexandra. I am so grateful for my team and everyone who supports Live Label Free. Together, we are always stronger.